At 6 in the morning, with the sun barely up and dew soaking through my boots, 3 strangers in bright yellow vests marched straight into my vineyard like they were storming a crime scene. They had fake badges clipped to their chests, clipboards in hand, and the kind of confidence you only get when you've never been punched by real consequences. One of them, a blonde woman with a sharp bob, perfect nails, and a smile that looked stapled on, stopped right in front of me and said my property was negatively impacting community aesthetics. Then she handed me a citation for $500 a day. I looked at that paper, looked at her, and thought, well, that's a hell of a way to ruin a perfectly good morning. My name's Marcus Brennan. I'm 52 years old, and my family has worked this land since 1987. My grandfather planted the first vines here back when this county was more dirt than asphalt, and we've been growing grapes ever since. Nothing fancy, just honest work, good soil, and enough stubbornness to keep a family business alive through drought, frost, bad markets, and worse politicians. The old farmhouse still creaks when the wind shifts. The stone walls my grandfather built still hold the line, and every morning the vineyard wakes up slow, mist hanging low, birds making a racket, rows of vines stretching out like they got all the time in the world. Then the subdivision next door showed up. About 5 years ago, a developer built 200 oversized houses and sold them as authentic wine country living. That phrase still makes me laugh in a way that isn't friendly. These people wanted vineyard views, but not vineyard life. They liked sunsets over the rows, but not tractors starting at dawn. They liked tasting rooms, but not the smell of fermentation during harvest. They wanted the postcard, not the farm. And the queen of that whole little kingdom was Delilah Worthington. You ever meet somebody who treats HOA rules like they were carved into stone by God himself? That was Delilah. Blonde bob, designer athleisure, white luxury SUV polish, so hard it practically reflected her own ego back at her, and a tone of voice that could turn a weather report into a threat. She had a little enforcement circus with her, too. Stewart, a retired insurance adjuster who sniffed out violations like a dog hunting bacon Janet, a former teacher who acted like bylaws were sacred scripture, and Bobby, an ex-security guard who looked way too happy to finally wear something bad-shaped again. That morning in my vineyard, Delilah told me the Ventnors Ridge HOA now had jurisdiction over all adjacent properties. I told her I wasn't in her HOA, never had been, never would be. She smirked like she'd heard that before, handed me the paper anyway, and said I had 72 hours to comply. So I smiled, pulled out my phone, and called Sheriff Morrison. He rolled up about 10 minutes later, calm as ever, no siren, no drama, just that slow, steady kind of presence that makes fake authority start sweating through expensive fabric. Delilah launched right into her speech. Community standards, agricultural compliance, serious concerns, and Morrison let her talk long enough to sound ridiculous. Then he asked one question. What agency issued the credentials? She started babbling about HOA authorization. He said, that's not what I asked. That shut the whole little pageant down real fast. He told them exactly what they were doing, trespassing, impersonating authority, waving around fake badges on private land. Delilah tried to retreat with dignity, which looked about as convincing as lipstick on a chainsaw. Before she left, though, she gave me that tight smile and said, don't get too comfortable, Mr. Brennan. We know how to work within the system. That was the real threat, and I knew it the second she said it. 2 days later, my phone started ringing like it had caught fire. County Code Enforcement, State Labor Board, Fire Marshal, environmental officials, zoning, safety, water use. By noon, I'd had a dozen calls, all based on complaints so coordinated they may as well have come out of the same printer. Same phrases, same corporate buzzwords, even the same typo in the word aesthetic. Somebody had built a paperwork missile and pointed it straight at my life. The inspection started that Monday. Inspector Rodriguez from the county looked around my property like a man trying to figure out why he'd been dragged into a joke with no punchline. He said, Marcus, whoever filed this claims you're violating residential zoning. You've been zoned agricultural since Carter was president. The fire marshal came expecting danger and found cleaner storage than half the businesses he inspected. The environmental guy practically wanted to frame my organic records. Every agency came in suspicious and left annoyed because there was nothing there, nothing illegal, nothing unsafe, nothing but a working farm doing exactly what it had done for decades. Before Rodriguez left, he pulled me aside and lowered his voice. He said he'd never seen complaints this coordinated. Same wording, same formatting, same typo. He handed me copies, and the paper trail pointed right back toward that subdivision. That's when I hired Sarah Jules. She was a property rights attorney recommended by the Farm Bureau, sharp as a blade and about as sentimental as a tax audit. Her office smelled like old paper and expensive consequences. She looked over my stack of complaints and said it was textbook harassment. But if I wanted to beat it, I needed more than outrage. I needed proof of coordination, proof of malice, proof of damages. So I started documenting everything. Photos, times, calls, reports, the whole mess. Then Delilah changed tactics. The inspections didn't shut me down, so she went after my business. My tasting room sales dropped off so hard it felt like somebody had cut a line somewhere I couldn't see. Then I started finding glossy flyers under windshield wipers in my parking lot, warning people about environmental risks and noise complaints. A website popped up making my vineyard sound like a toxic waste site with grapes. Then came the review bombing. 1-star reviews written in the same stiff little language, same fake concern, same obvious coordination. And Stewart made the kind of mistake a decent lawyer dreams about. He posted one, under his real name, complaining about tractor noise at 6:15 on a Tuesday morning. That was useful because nobody knew my Tuesday morning schedule unless they were watching my property like it was a television show. I screenshot that review so fast, I nearly cracked the screen. A few days later, I was at Murphy's Diner, drinking coffee that tasted like old pennies and bad decisions, when Bobby slid onto the stool next to me. He looked nervous enough to crawl out his own skin. He kept glancing around, then showed me his phone. Payment confirmations, instructions, messages from Delilah telling him to be creative, to find something actionable, to keep the pressure up. He said she wanted to bring in bigger agencies next. EPA, OSHA, whoever she could weaponize. Why was he showing me? Because I'd started putting up security cameras. And Bobby finally realized he didn't want to be the dumbest man in a criminal conspiracy. So I finished the camera system that weekend. Motion activated. Infrared. Cloud storage. Sharp enough to read a license plate in the dark. Best decision I made all year. Within days, I had footage of Delilah creeping past my driveway every morning in that white SUV, Janet trespassing after dark to photograph equipment from inside my property line. And enough surveillance to make the whole thing look less like neighbor drama and more like a cheap organized crime operation. Then came August. If you've never worked a vineyard, let me tell you something. There are a few days every year when everything matters. Water matters. Timing matters. One mistake can cost you a season. That Tuesday morning was already headed toward a brutal heat wave when I walked out and heard water hissing where it shouldn't be. Somebody had cut my main irrigation line in the night. Clean cuts. Strategic cuts. Not vandalism by accident. Sabotage by design. In that heat, I could have lost a crop. But Delilah made one fatal mistake. The cameras had everything. Infrared footage of a figure in a white jacket cutting the line with bolt cutters. A clean getaway setup. And parked out on the road, visible as day, was that white SUV with a readable plate. I stared at that footage with my jaw tight enough to crack teeth, then called my plumber, my lawyer, and everyone I knew. And this is the part I'll never forget. The farming community showed up. Frank Rodriguez brought a spare pump. Maria Santos hauled over tanks. Other growers came with hoses, labor, fittings, fuel, whatever they had. By noon, half the valley had rallied around me like we were fighting a wildfire. When somebody attacks one farmer out here, It hits a nerve that goes back generations. My plumber looked at the cuts and said whoever did it knew the system well enough to do maximum damage. While we were scrambling to save the vines, my cameras caught Delilah driving by 3 different times, slow enough to admire what she'd done. That right, there was almost art. If you enjoy watching arrogant self-destruct in high definition. Then Bobby came through again. He brought more texts, more payment records, and one beautiful audio clip of Delilah saying she wanted me financially ruined and didn't care what documentation had to be created to make that happen. Sarah Jules listened to that recording with the kind of quiet satisfaction that should make any guilty person start packing a bag. Sheriff Morrison took the criminal side personally. He'd grown up around farms. He understood what cutting irrigation during a heat wave really meant. Suddenly, this wasn't just harassment anymore. It was property destruction, fraud, conspiracy, attempted corruption of public process. And then, by what I can only call family luck, I found an old folder in my office. Inside was my grandfather's original deed. Buried in the legal language was an agricultural easement protecting farming operations on this land in perpetuity and placing adjacent residential development under that pre-existing agricultural use. In plain English, it meant the subdivision next door had been legally required from day one to put up with the ordinary sounds, smells, traffic, dust, and mess of a working farm. Jules nearly smiled. Nearly. She pulled the HOA documents and found the sweetest part of all. The easement had been acknowledged in their own governing paperwork. Delilah either knew she had no authority or was too reckless to care. Either way, every fake citation, every complaint, every threat was built on a lie. Once we dug deeper, we found I wasn't the only target. A horse rescue owner had paid to make Delilah's harassment go away. A landscaping business had done the same. Same fake authority, same pressure, same little settlement numbers meant to feel cheaper than a fight. At that point, it stopped being petty tyranny and started looking like a racket. Then Delilah got desperate enough to try bribing Inspector Rodriguez. She walked into his office with cash in an envelope and suggested he might take a more flexible view of my property if properly motivated. Rodriguez reported it immediately, agreed to follow up while wired, and she walked right into that too. Told him to find something actionable, to interpret creatively, to shut me down permanently. There are people who lose because life is unfair, and then there are people who lose because they insist on digging their own grave with construction equipment. Delilah was the second kind. By the time the county hearing came around in November, the room was packed. Farmers, residents, business owners, reporters, officials. I brought footage, documents, damage totals, timelines. People watched the irrigation sabotage video in dead silence. Bobby testified and looked like a man attending his own funeral, but he told the truth. Sheriff Morrison laid out the criminal side. Then, because apparently humiliation still hadn't gotten through to her, Delilah showed up in custody and tried to defend herself in public. She said she was protecting property values. That room turned on her like a storm. When I got the microphone, I kept it simple. I said my family had survived drought, frost, recession, disease, and every normal hardship that comes with farming. But nothing had hit us harder than one power-drunk HOA president using money, paperwork, and fake authority to try to erase a farm that had been here long before a subdivision existed. I told him the decision that night wasn't just about me. It was about whether family farms still had a place in this county, or whether enough bureaucracy and bullying could drive them out. The county voted unanimously for stronger agricultural protections. After that, everything finally started falling the right way. I got a settlement that covered my losses, my legal bills, the emergency equipment, and the business damage. The other victims got their money back too. The HOA cleaned house. Delilah took a plea deal, paid fines, and got community service cleaning up roadsides, which felt just about right. Her house went into foreclosure not long after. Last I heard, she'd moved out of state and was trying to start over somewhere nobody knew her name. Me? I kept farming. I used part of the settlement money to build an education center on the property. Now, kids come out here and learn what agriculture really is, not scenery, not branding, not something decorated behind a wine glass, but work, land, patience, risk, and community. The vineyard came back stronger. That vintage we almost lost ended up becoming one of our best sellers. Funny how stress can deepen a grape. Funny how the same thing can happen to a man. And the biggest lesson I took from all of it wasn't sweet or inspiring. It was hard. Power doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears expensive sunglasses and carries a clipboard. Sometimes it hides behind rules it barely understands and money that isn't even its own. And if nobody pushes back, it keeps growing until it thinks cruelty is just management. These days, I still walk the rows every morning with coffee in my hand. The mist still hangs low. The birds still scream like tiny lunatics. The irrigation runs clean. The vines are healthy. The land keeps going, which is maybe the most comforting thing I know. And every once in a while, I think about that first fake citation, that smug smile, that lecture about aesthetics, and I have to laugh. Because in the end, she came from my farm and lost her badge, her money, her house, her reputation, and whatever illusion of power she'd built around herself. That wasn't revenge. That was gravity. So tell me this. When somebody uses fake authority, money, and pressure to crush the people who were there first, is fighting back just self-defense, or does justice always have a little revenge hiding inside it? And if you've ever had your own run-in with somebody drunk on tiny power, I'd love to hear it.